parents funded my sister's lavish life while my son fought to survive. Growing up, there were four of us. My dad, 60, a senior insurance agent, my mom, a high school math teacher, my older sister, Sarah, and me. On the outside, we had a nice home and seemed like a happy family. But the reality was far from it. My parents showed a blatant favoritism towards Sarah that felt like a shadow over my life. It wasn't just small, forgettable things, it was every aspect of how we were raised. When Sarah and I were little, she got everything: the piano lessons, the dance classes, even art tutorials. I wasn't allowed any of those. When I asked if I could join an activity, the answer was always, "We can't afford 2 kids and extracurriculars." This favoritism grew more obvious with each year. Sarah had brand new clothes and the latest phones, while I made do with her worn-out hand-me-downs. She even got braces when she wanted them at 13. When I needed them, I was told we couldn't afford it, and to this day, I still have crooked teeth. Things only got worse. For her 16th birthday, Sarah received a brand new Honda Civic. When I turned 16, I was told to get a part-time job to save up for a car. I worked at McDonald's after school for 2 years, and my hard-earned savings only stretched far enough for a used Toyota that barely lasted 6 months before it broke down. While Sarah could focus on her studies and extracurriculars, I had to juggle work with school just to afford basic things like supplies and clothes. When college came, the differences were even starker. Sarah went to an expensive private university, fully funded by my parents. They covered everything: tuition, a semester abroad in Paris, and even a condo near her campus. I couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, I was scraping by at a community college, working 2 jobs, a coffee shop by day and as a library assistant on campus, to afford bus fare and textbooks. It felt as if I was invisible to them, just a background presence in their lives. In my 3rd year, I met James, a kind, hardworking engineering student with a gentle soul. He knew what struggle looked like, too. His parents had died in a car accident when he was in high school, and he was raised by an aunt who taught him the value of resilience. He was my light during those difficult years, the first person who made me feel truly cared for. After dating for 3 years, we got married. I wanted a small courthouse wedding to save money, but James insisted on something special for me: a small ceremony at a local church. Even then, my parents nearly skipped it because Sarah had arranged a vacation that weekend. They only showed up after my aunt made a scene. 2 years into our marriage, I became pregnant with our son, Tommy. The pregnancy was tough. I battled morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and other complications. But at 32 weeks, our worst fears came true. A routine scan revealed that Tommy had a severe heart condition. The doctors explained that he would need several surgeries throughout his life, starting immediately after birth. James and I were devastated, but we vowed to do whatever we could to give Tommy the best life possible. Tommy's first surgery took place the day after he was born. It was a $150,000 procedure. Insurance covered most of it, but we still had to pay $30,000 out of pocket. We drained our savings and took out loans. James took on overtime at work, and I worked from home as a virtual assistant to care for Tommy while helping cover the bills. It was exhausting, but we made it work. 6 months later, Tommy needed another surgery. Already overwhelmed by the payments for the first surgery, I turned to my parents for help. They had just returned from a Mediterranean cruise with Sarah. I showed them the bills, explained our situation, and even mentioned that we had sold our car to afford Tommy's care. I was met with blank stares and a familiar refrain: "We're having financial problems and can't help." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents, but I had no idea they were hiding a truth that would shatter me. We struggled on, barely managing as James took on freelance projects and 80-hour weeks. The financial and physical toll pushed him to exhaustion, and he eventually fainted at work. I picked up more virtual assistant clients, and we started selling our belongings online. All this while, my parents continued their charade. They bought Sarah a new Mercedes for her birthday and went on 3 vacations with her that year, claiming Sarah had paid for everything. I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? Then, last month, Tommy's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. His heart was failing, and he needed an emergency surgery costing $50,000. Our insurance limit had been reached, and we had no way to get the funds quickly. Desperate, I went back to my parents, literally on my knees, begging for their help. I offered to pay them back double, give them our house, anything if they would just help save Tommy. Again, they refused, claiming they were broke from recent medical expenses. Tommy passed away 2 days later because we couldn't afford his surgery. He was only 2 years old. At his funeral, my parents stayed for 30 minutes, saying they had to leave to help Sarah with an urgent matter. I was numb. Then, a week later, while I was cleaning Tommy's room, I found my dad's old phone under the bed. He must have left it there on his last visit. On a whim, I opened it. What I found shattered whatever was left of my heart. There, in hundreds of messages between my parents and Sarah, was the truth they had hidden. For years, my parents had been supporting a secret life for Sarah. She had been married for 7 years to a man named Mark and had 3 children with him, living in Florida. Every month, my parents sent her $5,000 for expenses, $2,000 per child for private school, and even paid for their vacations to places like Hawaii and Europe. Last year, they had bought her a $400,000 summer house in the Hamptons and paid for her housekeeping and lawn maintenance. They even covered the down payment on a beach house, wiring Sarah $75,000 just 5 days before telling me they couldn't afford to help with Tommy's surgery. I spent hours scrolling through those messages, reading about their extravagant gifts for Sarah's children, luxuries that could have saved my son's life. They bought her kids iPads, a gaming console, and even planned Christmas presents worth thousands of dollars. I sat there, gripping the phone, as the weight of their betrayal settled in. All this time, they had been telling me they couldn't afford to help. But that was a lie. They chose to let my son die to support Sarah's life of luxury. I confronted them at the next family gathering. Everyone was there: my aunts, uncles, cousins, 25 people who thought they knew our family. But they didn't know this truth, and I was done keeping their secrets. I arrived at the monthly family dinner with a sense of finality. My dad's old phone was in my pocket, my evidence of what they had done. After everyone finished eating and gathered in the living room, I connected his phone to the TV, mirroring the screen so everyone could see the messages, bank transfers, and photos of Sarah's hidden life. It took only seconds for the room to fall silent as the truth unfolded in front of everyone. I began, my voice barely steady. I revealed how, while I begged for help to save Tommy's life, my parents were sending Sarah thousands each month, paying for her children's private school fees, buying her a summer house, and even wiring her $75,000 for a beach house just days before Tommy's death. I told them that my son had died because my parents chose to spend their money on Sarah's luxuries instead of saving their grandson's life. The reactions were instant. My mother started sobbing and tried to come closer, but I stepped back. My father sat silently, staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. And then there was Sarah, watching me with an unsettling smirk. "You're always so dramatic," she said, her voice filled with disdain. "I have 3 kids to support. You should understand that's why they had to help me." Her words made me feel cold inside. "Did your kids deserve to live more than mine?" I asked, my voice trembling. But Sarah just shrugged, dismissing me as if my pain meant nothing. My mother tried to justify their actions, explaining that Sarah had always been more fragile and needed their support. My dad chimed in, claiming they'd help Sarah because she wasn't as strong and independent as I was. But these empty explanations only made things worse. My Aunt Susan looked at them in horror. "You let your grandson die while you were buying Sarah a beach house?" she demanded. My parents had no answer. Relatives, shocked and furious, started asking my parents about all the times they had borrowed money, claiming family emergencies. Sarah snapped, her face red with anger, saying I had no right to expose her private life like this and accusing me of jealousy. "You're just mad because they've always loved me more," she spat, as if this made her betrayal justifiable. I stared at her, finally seeing her for who she truly was. "You're not my family anymore," I said, my voice shaking. "My son is dead because of you." With that, I left, blocking their numbers and cutting them out of my life. Some relatives followed me outside, offering their support and even suggesting I pursue legal action. Others, however, later messaged me, saying I went too far, that I should have handled things privately. But James stood by my decision, even though he worried about the impact on the extended family. None of that mattered to me anymore. My son was dead because they chose to prioritize Sarah's lifestyle over his life. That was all the reason I needed. After that dinner, more family secrets began spilling out. My Aunt Linda called a few days later, breaking down as she told me how she had lent Sarah $30,000 last year after Sarah claimed her eldest child needed emergency surgery. Linda had used her retirement savings because she couldn't bear the thought of another child suffering as Tommy had. But it was a lie. Sarah had spent that money renovating her beach house kitchen and installing a pool. Then my cousin Emily came forward with a story that left me sick to my stomach. Sarah's husband, Mark, wasn't just some man she'd met in Florida. He was actually Emily's fiancé from 8 years ago. Emily and Mark had dated through college and were weeks away from getting married when he vanished, leaving only a note saying he wasn't ready. Emily had spiraled into depression, needing therapy for years. Now, she knew the truth. Sarah had seduced Mark, convincing him to leave Emily and move to Florida. My parents had known all along, even helping Sarah pick out her new home. They had attended Sarah's secret wedding just 3 months after Emily was left heartbroken. More secrets surfaced. Sarah's ex-husband, Tom, reached out to me on social media. I hadn't even known she'd been married before Mark. According to Tom, Sarah had married him after college, and they had a daughter together. One day, when their daughter was 2, Sarah emptied their bank accounts, taking $40,000 of their savings and Tom's inheritance, and vanished. She had told everyone Tom was abusive, painting herself as the victim. Tom had been searching for her for years to secure child support for their daughter, who was now 15. My parents had been hiding Sarah's whereabouts from him, even helping her fabricate evidence to support her lies. I couldn't believe how deep the lies and betrayal went. These weren't the parents I thought I knew. These were strangers who had enabled Sarah's every deceit. The idea that they let Tommy die while funneling money into Sarah's life made me feel hollow inside. It wasn't long before I discovered even more betrayals. James, while going through some of our old paperwork, found that the trust fund my parents had promised to set up for Tommy was completely empty. They had assured us they were putting in $1,000 each month for him, but every penny had been transferred to Sarah's children's accounts instead. My parents had even written letters to hospitals, claiming they were financially strapped so they couldn't help us with Tommy's bills, all while bank statements showed monthly transfers to Sarah. The final blow came from my dad's secretary, who contacted me through LinkedIn. She revealed that my father had been embezzling money from his company, marking transfers to Sarah as business expenses. My mom's best friend, who worked at the same school, then informed me that my mom had been skimming from the school's emergency medical fund to support Sarah. It seemed there was no limit to how far my parents would go to fund Sarah's life, even if it meant breaking laws or leaving other people's children vulnerable. Sarah attempted to reach out, using new phone numbers every time I blocked her. She alternated between threatening lawsuits and leaving voicemails, claiming I had ruined her life. But I was beyond caring. This was her doing, and I had no sympathy left to give. A letter soon arrived from my parents through their lawyer. They offered to establish a trust fund for my future children if I agreed not to pursue legal action. They even attached a non-disclosure agreement, hoping I'd be silent in exchange for money. It was all so hollow. They had let my son die, yet now wanted to buy back my silence. I didn't respond. The fallout from my confrontation spread quickly. Many relatives started contacting me, sharing stories that only added to the horror. My parents and Sarah had been manipulating and exploiting family members for years, preying on their kindness and trust. A few days after the confrontation, Aunt Linda came by again, this time to talk more openly. She confessed she had always sensed favoritism, but thought my parents were simply a bit protective of Sarah. The extent of their deception left her furious and heartbroken. Aunt Linda had emptied her retirement account to help Sarah's supposedly sick child, money that she would now never recover. To her, this revelation was like losing a part of her own family, people she thought she'd known all her life. But it didn't stop there. My cousin Emily, devastated by the truth about Sarah and Mark, came to visit. She showed me old emails she'd recently uncovered that Sarah and my parents had exchanged before Mark vanished. These emails prove they had schemed to get Sarah and Mark together, targeting him specifically because his family was financially comfortable. They'd taken advantage of Emily's vulnerability, knowing she was fully invested in her future with Mark. Betrayed by her cousin and her own family, Emily decided to take legal action against Sarah for the emotional trauma she had endured. The case was painful, but brought her a sense of justice and a symbolic victory over the years she'd lost. More skeletons tumbled out. I learned Sarah's first husband, Tom, had re-entered the picture, determined to get back the child support Sarah had avoided paying for years. He had proof that my parents had helped her escape, fabricating abuse claims to secure a restraining order against him. My parents had even funded Sarah's legal battle, preventing Tom from contacting his own daughter. Now, thanks to the evidence Tom brought forward, a judge ordered Sarah to pay back over $150,000 in unpaid child support plus interest. Since she was broke, her inheritance from my grandmother's estate was garnished to start paying off the debt. Then, just when I thought I'd uncovered everything, James found further evidence linking my parents' financial misdeeds to Tommy's medical expenses. He'd been going through old documents and discovered that my parents had lied to the hospitals where Tommy had been treated, claiming they were retired and living on fixed incomes to avoid financial responsibility. In reality, during those same months, they were transferring thousands to Sarah. The idea that my parents could outright lie to save Sarah money while watching us struggle was more than I could bear. I felt trapped between outrage and heartbreak, knowing that no amount of anger could bring Tommy back. Word spread about the confrontation, and even friends of my parents began distancing themselves. My dad's golfing buddies no longer invited him to their weekly games after finding out how he had let his own grandson die to support Sarah's lifestyle. My mom had to leave her beloved book club when the other members, many of whom were parents of her students, made it clear they didn't want her there anymore. She had once been a respected teacher and community figure. Now, she was seen as someone who enabled fraud and betrayal. Then, while I was at home one evening, James made another disturbing discovery. When Tommy was born, my parents had claimed they'd set up a trust fund for him, just like they'd supposedly done for all their grandchildren. They'd even assured us they were adding $1,000 a month, something they repeated often. Yet when we checked the account, it was empty. Instead, we found records showing they'd redirected all of that money to accounts for Sarah's children. It was as if every opportunity to prioritize Tommy had instead been an opportunity to fund Sarah's luxuries. As we continued looking into the trust fund debacle, my dad's former secretary reached out. She explained that he had been funneling company money into Sarah's accounts by marking transactions as business expenses. It turned out he had been falsifying documents, creating a fake consulting role for Sarah, through which he funneled thousands. He even created fake insurance policies, pocketing the premiums to help finance Sarah's hidden life. This deception wasn't just against us. It was a betrayal of his company and every colleague who trusted him. Meanwhile, my mom's best friend, a fellow teacher, confessed that my mom had been stealing from the school's emergency medical fund, funneling the money to Sarah under the guise of supporting family emergencies. Each time the school raised money to help a student in crisis, my mom had access to those accounts, and she had been transferring money to Sarah's lifestyle without anyone suspecting a thing. Things spiraled as Sarah started to panic, calling me from random numbers whenever I blocked her. She went from threatening lawsuits to pleading for my sympathy. In one voicemail, she warned that if I didn't stop talking about her, she would spread rumors that I had abused Tommy. But by now, her threats meant nothing. I was beyond her reach, and I had nothing left to lose. Then, just when I thought my parents couldn't stoop lower, they sent a formal letter through their lawyer. They proposed setting up a new trust fund for any future children I might have, offering $200,000 as a gesture of goodwill if I agreed not to take legal action. They also included a non-disclosure agreement, demanding that I never discuss their financial support for Sarah again. Their offer felt like a twisted bribe, an attempt to buy back their reputation while erasing Tommy's memory and their role in his death. I didn't even dignify it with a response. As the weeks passed, more relatives distanced themselves from my parents. Some sent messages of support, while others claimed I was being too harsh, that my parents had learned their lesson and paid the price by losing their reputations and standing in the community. But all I could think was how Tommy had paid the ultimate price for their choices, and no amount of guilt or shame on their part would ever make up for his life lost. The hardest part was that, as people dug deeper, they kept finding photos of Sarah's family on lavish vacations, posted online by her friends or on social media. There were photos of them at Disney World and other expensive resorts during the exact weeks that Tommy was fighting for his life. In these photos, Sarah's children were dressed in matching designer outfits, each one worth more than we needed to save our son. Each new piece of evidence felt like a fresh wound, reopening the grief I carried for Tommy. The betrayal was never-ending, and yet, as painful as it was, I was grateful that people finally saw my family for who they truly were. 6 months have passed since I exposed my parents and Sarah, and their lives have completely unraveled. My dad's company finished its investigation, uncovering that he had been siphoning funds by creating fake insurance policies and falsifying documents. They fired him and filed criminal charges. The stolen money totaled $400,000, and he was ordered to pay it back. Now he works nights as a security guard, his professional life shattered beyond repair. My mom, once beloved by her students and respected in the community, was forced into early retirement after parents began protesting her involvement in the school's fundraising. The school district launched its own investigation into the missing funds, and while no formal charges have been filed yet, the suspicion alone has ostracized her. My parents sold their house and most of their possessions to cover legal expenses and now live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, a far cry from the comfort they once boasted. As for Sarah, her once carefully crafted life collapsed in a matter of weeks. Mark, her husband, hired a private investigator who uncovered more of her lies. He discovered Sarah had another child from a previous relationship before her marriage to Tom, a child she had abandoned years ago without telling anyone. This revelation broke Mark, who had no idea about Sarah's web of deceit. He filed for divorce and, given Sarah's history of fraud and abandonment, won full custody of their 3 children. The judge deemed Sarah unfit for unsupervised visits, allowing her only restricted, supervised contact with the kids. Mark moved back to his hometown in Texas with the children, effectively erasing Sarah from their lives. Heartbroken but determined to protect his kids, he even secured a restraining order after she started creating fake social media profiles to contact him. As far as I know, she's alone now, with no contact from her children and no support from her former husband. Then, Tom, Sarah's first husband, won his back child support case against her. After years of evading her obligations, she was finally ordered to pay him $150,000, with interest for the years she had disappeared. Since she has no assets left, the court garnished her small inheritance from our grandmother to begin repaying the debt. Even worse, Sarah's teenage daughter with Tom now refuses any contact with Sarah or my parents after learning the truth about her mother's lies and manipulation. Sarah's betrayal didn't stop at just family, though. Emily, my cousin, who had been abandoned by Mark thanks to Sarah's interference, decided to take Sarah to court as well. She filed a civil suit for emotional distress, citing the emails as proof that Sarah and my parents had orchestrated the entire affair to break up her engagement. Her case had strong evidence, and Sarah eventually settled out of court, signing over her beach house to Emily as part of the agreement. Emily now lives there, a bittersweet recompense for years of heartache. And just when I thought Sarah had hit rock bottom, she proved me wrong. Recently, she was arrested for trying to open new credit cards under her children's names using their social security numbers. She's now facing serious criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. I got a call from the jail, Sarah asking for help with bail money, but I hung up and blocked the number. I had nothing left to say to her. Through all this, James has been my rock, but it hasn't been easy on him. We've both had to endure the backlash from extended family, who still argue I should forgive my parents. They insist my parents have paid their dues and have lost everything. My Uncle Bob, in particular, keeps telling me how my parents cry at family gatherings, saying they miss me and regret everything. But all I can think about is how my son missed out on his entire life because of their decisions. My sympathy is exhausted. But one good thing came from all this. My Aunt Linda and a few cousins have grown closer to me, offering genuine support. Aunt Linda even moved to Colorado with us to be there for us during this painful time, and we've started to rebuild a sense of family, one that values honesty, compassion, and respect. James recently accepted a job offer in Colorado, one with better pay and medical benefits. We decided it was the fresh start we desperately needed. Only a few close family members know about our plans. This time, we're protecting our privacy and our peace. Recently, we learned I'm 4 months pregnant. This news is bittersweet. We're overjoyed, but the memory of Tommy lingers in every quiet moment. His photos still hang in our new home, his memory woven into our lives in ways both painful and beautiful. I talk about him often, so he'll always be a part of us. As for my parents and Sarah, they no longer hold any place in our lives, nor will they ever meet this new baby. I know they regret what they did, but that regret is too little, too late. The hardest lesson I've learned is that sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who hurt you the worst. But with this fresh start, I'm focusing on the future, determined to create a family filled with love and support, qualities that I wish I'd known growing up. Looking back, I see the truth now. I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for, and I serve